Welcome to the HR Off Script. This is the podcast where we will uncover opportunities and talk about conversations that usually happen behind closed doors. We will uncover everything around cost opportunities, business outcomes, and really look at how we lead and build culture in the world of work today, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. I'm extremely happy to welcome to the HR Off Script today, Aditi Nair. She's been my friend from the time I landed in Singapore and now is a client. Aditi is a renowned HR professional, known very well across Asia Pacific, with having 22 years of experience across various facets of HR, and currently she is the HR head for Barclays across Asia Pacific. Welcome, Aditi, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Roop. Absolutely my pleasure to be here with you today.
Great. And today we are talking about skills. Let's look at the scenario. Lime is a front office support analyst. She is a self-learner, a digital native, and knowing how the technology and the industry is changing, she's been learning herself everything about data, pricing methodologies, how algo systems work, and how the systems are changing. She could see the writing on the wall that she's no longer going to be a fix a screen kind of analyst, but really needed to upskill herself. At AMS, we believe that skills is the new currency of work. And today we're going to talk about that, Aditi. Before we go, we will come back to this question, definitely. But I'd love to hear from you how you as an HR professional, and in particular, Barclays is looking at skills as the currency of work and skills for organizations.
Yeah. And I think that's an absolutely relevant topic for us to be discussing today, Roop. And we will delve a lot into, the challenges that Lime actually does face. But I'll just give you a bit of context on, how we look at skills-based organizations. So let's start from the basics. In very, very simple terms, a skill-based organization is one that looks at work, looks at careers, looks at growth from a lens of how soon and quickly people can learn the skills. It's not about titles, it's not about hierarchies, it's not about jobs. When we look at jobs or titles, they tend to be static in nature. However, skills, when we talk about skills, they tend to be dynamic. And organizations which don't, lay their bets on skills can soon lose their sort of relevance. I think you spoke about, skills being the currency. And I love to use this metaphor, which is it'll be great to look at skills as money, right, in very sort of simple terms. And what does that help you do? If you look at or equate skills to money, you would look at investing in them, you look at growing them, you would look at, whether the value of that is either depreciating or appreciating. So you have a constant lens of, personalizing it to use it for your own benefit. Also, what you can do is exchange that for various opportunities that come your way, in your job context. So for me, that analogy works very well. And I've seen that play out a number of times whenever we have the conversation around skills. When people say, why do I need to, get on through this journey of building a particular skill? I say, look at it from an opportunity of whether you're adding something to yourself. Often I've seen that organizations really fail in their skills journey because they don't know what they are upskilling for and why they're upskilling, right? And as long as you take people in that sort of journey, I think it works very well. So I often tell people, look at skills as something, if you're investing in a new skill, look at it from a point of view that you're appreciating your value on a particular skill. If there's a skill that you learned many years back and is no longer relevant, so the value of that is already depreciated. So constantly having that, thought in mind as to how do I keep myself relevant is what really drives organizations.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to use that metaphor more and more because when I talk about currency, I hadn't sort of, really appreciated how you've brought it to life beautifully with the money analogy as well. Let's go a bit deeper, and particularly looking at sort of, skills in the context of Asia. We all work for global multinationals, but and there is definitely a need to do things in a very global manner because that's what our clients expect. However, there is a local lens to that as well. And I have often found that sometimes in this Asian context, the pace is much quicker. Employees want to do much more, but they might not be aligned with where the organization is moving, particularly, with that same pace. Would love to sort of, get your view on how does that play out? I guess two things. One is from an Asia lens, and the second is the employee versus organization lens.
Yeah. So I've worked in sort of multinational organizations for close to about 2 decades now, and that's a quintessential question that we all try and answer at all points of time. I think being part of any global organization, what's most important is, the importance of being globally consistent, because that's what organizations like. But at the same time, what's also important is how do you remain locally relevant? So a few ways in which I've personally experienced this over the years. So one key thing is just understanding the why behind. If there's a particular change that the global teams are trying to drive, why is it that is important for them? And how is it that you can contribute to that either at the similar pace or at a faster pace? Secondly, I would say just demonstrating the impact that you have from a regional perspective of doing things faster, and also making the global team sort of appreciate the fact that if you don't get along in the boat, the talent landscape here is very different. Right. So if you don't take people along the boat, for example, countries like China, etc., were far ahead in the technology game. And if you hadn't actually taken charge of that much earlier in Asia, you would have lost out. So there is an advantage of making sure that you're quite relevant in the sort of local talent market, though things may not move at the same pace across the globe. The other thing is also that if there are things that you can learn which are, more beneficial or happening at a faster pace in the other regions, how do you show adoption? Okay, because, the greater the adoption, the better the sort of built of trust. I would say just on the skills journey that we spoke about, I honestly think the West has adopted it and adapted to it much faster than us in Asia. Because in Asia, there is still a huge hangover that I feel we have around jobs, titles, hierarchy.
Right.
So there's definitely something for us to learn where, how do we shift the thinking from a job-based thinking to a skills-based thinking? How do we, hire based on skills? How do we look at problems and say what skills might help us solve them rather than sort of just relying so much on experience? So that's more on at an organizational level. If we sort of come down to an individual level, and I think that's where the question that you posed in the very beginning becomes very relevant. If you have a colleague who's moving at much faster pace than what the organization is, how do you keep the person engaged?
Absolutely.
Because these are people who are very keen to move and progress. If you don't keep them engaged or they feel that they are ignored, there are heightened levels of frustration. And these fast learners are the ones which are at highest retention risk, right? Because they always have something that is priced out in the market that they can always sort of avail of. So if you don't create space for such fast learners, they will create space for themselves or, in either another team or, outside the organization. And all the investment that you've actually done on them fails quite a bit. So I do think as organizations, it's our responsibility to recognize them almost as what I would call early warning signals of people who can, look at risks much earlier on, spot trends, and how do we really leverage that ability. I actually almost call it learning velocity, right? As someone who has like tremendous amount of learning velocity, I think it's also the organization's responsibility to make sure that they're constantly providing them opportunities to keep pace with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have shared a really good sort of balanced view of individual versus organization and global versus versus sort of local or regional. But ultimately, what I'm hearing is definitely at a skill level, it is the business imperative or the business outcome that we're trying to drive. So if it's Lime or it's Aditi or Roop, what is it that we're learning that actually adds on to the organization's business outcomes? And that's an interesting, I think, point given the current sort of world of AI and technology, where as such skills are fast evaporating.
Yeah.
In fact, the half life of skills has gone down drastically from 15 years pre-COVID to like on an average 5 to 7 years. So definitely, I think we need to keep these fast learners,
Yes.
but at the same time, making sure that they have the platform to contribute
Right.
and they understand that it's in their control to not just learn, but also to continue to implement what they've learned and make it truly contextualized in the organizational frameworks. I think that's beautiful from a takeaway perspective. In terms of sort of just further digging into your experience into, I know that you've been a leader across facets of HR, but particularly learning, development, and talent. How do you see this evolving for the future?
Yeah, so the conversation around skills is honestly not new, Roop. It has definitely picked up sort of pace in the most sort of recent 3 to 4 years. And I think the reason being the reason that you actually shared, the shelf life of skills has drastically come down.
Right.
And people realize that, things that they had learned or they learn at a particular point of time that lasted for a much longer time are no longer, long lasting. So there is this constant, I won't say pressure, but need for people to make sure that they're aware of what are those things that they need to be, constantly upskilling, reskilling themselves on. Otherwise, they're going to become irrelevant.
Right.
I would also say that the point that you made was really absolutely essential. Upskilling, reskilling, or looking at skills is not an HR imperative only, right? HR is probably an enablement function which helps deliver the outcomes. However, it is really linked to what the business wants to achieve. So the first question I would say for any organization who's either starting on the journey or taking a pause and looking at their skills framework is saying, what are the skills that I need to build my business for the future? Right? If that's a fundamental question that they are able to answer, it's easy for them to take people along the journey. They identify 2 or 3 things that they really need to do instead of making it very generic and, all pervasive that nobody understands. And at the same time, they make sure that, they're investing in the right direction. Otherwise, you do a lot. It's almost a jack of all trades. You put in a lot of efforts to do many things, but the outcome is not what really drives business results.
Right, absolutely. I think that business orientation is key. Just one quick, deeper dive. Do you see from a skills perspective, technical versus non-technical, or soft versus hard skills? Any view on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I was actually doing some reading, on this entire concept of skills, and like everybody, I did end up using, one of the AI platforms, I won't name which one, to give me some insights of top 2 or 3 skills that might be relevant from a future point of view. I think the top one that came up was learning agility or learning velocity. I think that sort of underpins everything because the moment you have that, you can actually adapt and learn everything, whether it is something which is technical or non-technical. I think from a technical skill perspective, it's really important to distill what role you are in and what level and depth of technical skills do you really need. If you are, of course, a coder or a programmer, knowing everything that's happening in that space is really critical. If you're not in that space, it's important how changes are actually going to impact your workforce.
Absolutely.
So I think that is the level you need to distill very clearly what is that technical knowledge going to help you. But if you were to talk about soft skills, I think the soft skills that are important, like I said, is learning agility. I would say communication is becoming extremely important. Even if you don't have depth in a particular subject, how do you make sure that you're able to translate that, in a very succinct manner to your audience is important. So I would say it's still a balance. I wouldn't sort of, tilt it in favor of one or over the other.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I agree. And just to talk shop for a bit, definitely at AMS we look at talent holistically when we think about either filling a role or helping organizations sort of hire at scale. We don't look at it from a just this is the candidate perspective. It needs to be the best candidate for the best job, and really that skilling piece is very important. And where we are going with this is really ensuring that we help organizations to build that talent at scale. They might come from external, but they might even come from an internal talent pool, similar to Lime. We might identify somebody who's been doing these upskilling themselves, or sometimes they might come from a contractor that has the right skills. So really looking at that talent at scale is, or rather talent to from all aspects is where we work with organizations. As we are closing out, I'd also love to hear your thoughts on the evolution and where this is going. You're absolutely right that skills is not a new phenomena, but probably how the talent intelligence technologies have been talking about it has made it bigger than it needs to be. But given the the dynamic nature of the world that we live in and how the skills are evolving, what do you think is going to be the next key sort of development in the skills space?
Honestly, Roop, I don't have a crystal ball. Like skills are changing so rapidly. I'm sure whatever I say today might not be relevant tomorrow. But what I see happening is the entire discussion around skills getting integrated more and more into what we're doing in organizations. So today, it's not just from a point of view that, I need to get ready for the next role that I'm doing. It is about, how do I look at careers from a long-term perspective? How do I look at mobility opportunities? How do I look at problems that I have, or creating like a skills marketplace and putting myself out there for projects that might sort of come up? So I think going forward, the way I look at it is that people are going to not look at long-term career aspirations, but they're going to look at what experiences or what skills and capabilities am I building in every role that I'm doing.
Right.
And organizations keeping that in mind while they are either hiring or they are moving people, or even when they're looking at sort of retention aspects. Someone who's done really well so far may not be part of your future because, they really don't have that mindset to progress. So I think organizations themselves are sort of reframing what the entire skill journey looks for them. Classic example, when we look at hiring analysts now, we don't ask them the career, they don't ask us the question, we don't ask them the question saying, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Right? The question they are asking us is, what's the role will I do? What kind of skills will I build in this role? And how will this help me get my next job? So I think that's becoming reality, and which every organization has to embrace, right?
Absolutely.
Not just grapple with. I would say embrace with open arms.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to sort of where we started with Lime, I think where organizations really need to think about it is for innovation and growth, how to ensure that people that have the learning velocity and are digital natives are able to skill themselves, are really engaged and retained across the employee journey, as well as those individuals need to think about the organization context, because ultimately we're all in the business of serving to our business outcomes and our shareholders' return. With that, I think it's a wrap. Thank you so much, Aditi. It was a pleasure talking to you about skills and everything under the sun as it relates to skills, from organizations to global, regional, as well as what the future may hold. None of us have a crystal ball, but I think the key is that we need to continue to focus on educating the employees as well as our organizations to be able to strike the balance well.
Thank you so much, Roop. Thanks for having me here.